Hello, my name is Lauren Huddleston, and I'm a Cultural Resource Management Archaeologist with Wood Consulting. I'll be presenting a brief overview of the main compliance law for historic preservation in the United States, most often called Section 106. First off, what is a cultural resource? The typical definition of a cultural resource is tied to the NHPA term, historic property. This is defined in the highlighted text. However, it basically means any artifacts or properties that are 50 years old or older. And the main types of these are usually discussed as prehistoric, ethnohistoric, and historic, though some revisions have been suggested. Let's look quickly at how cultural resources protections developed in the United States. Beginning in 1906, the Antiquities Act was the first real effort of the federal government to protect cultural resources on federal property. However, the problem with this law was that it was very vague. So vague, in fact, that it was ruled unconstitutional and had to be amended. It wasn't until the 1960s urban renewal plans to remove urban blight from the landscape that new interest for cultural resources protections developed. As a result of this widespread destruction of historic neighborhoods, efforts spearheaded by Lady Bird Johnson eventually passed in 1966 as the National Historic Preservation Act, or NHPA. Some other important laws affecting cultural resources were also passed later, including the 1970 National Environmental Policy Act, the 1979 Archaeological Resources Protection Act, and the 1990 Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. This makes complying with federal cultural resources law in the United States somewhat complicated, but most of these are situational laws, and the main compliance law is the NHPA, or Section 106 process. The NHPA did several important things. It created the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation, which would be the overarching organization to oversee implementation of the Act. It created the state historic preservation offices, state-level organizations charged with implementing the law in their states. It created a National Register of Historic Places, a list of historically significant properties, and for the first time, federal law required consideration of cultural resources. Here's Section 106 in its entirety, but the highlighted portion is the main directive of the law. In its basic, it states that we must consider how archaeological properties eligible for inclusion on the National Register will be impacted by federal projects or projects using federal funds. So just what is the National Register? Really, it's just a big list of historically significant properties. It can include individual homes, such as Mount Vernon, a district of significant properties, such as the French Quarter, or single artifacts of unique or rare finds, like the Lovelock Cave duck decoys. Any number of district sites, buildings, structures, or objects can be included on the register. But how does a property become included? It's important that it must qualify by meeting one or more of the criterion for inclusion. I've summed up the National Register criteria with some quick phrases here. But essentially, criterion A is the association with events that have made significant contributions to our broad pattern of history. B is any association with the lives of persons significant to our past. C is the embodiment of distinctive characteristics of a type, method of construction, or that represents the work of a master or high artistic value. And D is a criterion that allows us to seek further data potential or information that is important to prehistory or history. Here's the Section 106 process flow chart according to the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation. First, we need to initiate or define the project and its potential effects. Second, we have to identify, conduct archaeological survey or architectural assessments. Next, we need to assess, create evaluations, and determine which eligible properties will be affected by potential impacts. Third, we have to resolve those effects. Mitigation efforts such as archaeological excavation to collect data from sites, or further research to develop displays or museum exhibits or other agreed upon treatments to offset impacts. NHPA is a process law. The Section 106 review process provides the opportunity for groups or individuals to alert the federal government of historic properties that have value and influence the decisions regarding their preservation. It isn't perfect, but it requires a reasonably good faith effort through the process. and completing the process provides some protection for any proponent from litigation, but it doesn't always guarantee any protection to the resource. The Section 106 process isn't clearly defined, though there are clearly defined steps. Each project or undertaking requires its own unique considerations. Scope, level of effort, and the ultimate recommendations are all dictated by the needs of the project and the nature of cultural resources that are present. Communication is essential between proponents, consultants, stakeholders, and the permitting agencies. By involving all stakeholders, including tribes, interest groups, and the general public, and being transparent between proponents, agencies, and consultants, we can guarantee protections for cultural resources and successfully complete any undertaking.